On today's show, we interviewed Kathryn Gordon, who is a wife to John Gordon. She's a savvy business owner, real estate investor, movie producer, and best-selling author. Her book, Relationship Grit, we dove all into what does grit actually mean? How can you apply it to your life and to your relationship? I loved the candid conversation that we had with Kathryn, how she met John, raising her kids, and so many fun stories in between. You're going to love this podcast with Kathryn.
Well, we are so excited for the show. Welcome to the Rainmaker Family Show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, you carry so much wisdom, so much authority. We always talk about bringing guests on who have authority, which means like you've not just like learned about the topic, but you have honed the topic. You've gone through the battle and you're coming back to help other people
Yeah.
make it easier. And I feel like you carry so much authority in the realm of relationships. So we're just watching you on the Today Show, watch all the books and things that you guys are putting out. And so we really wanted to lean into that topic. I know we might hit parenting a little bit too, but I feel like if we build the business, but we don't protect the marriage, it's not worth it. And so we would love to hear from you just a little bit about your relationship story with John. Like, how did you guys meet? What was the ups and downs? Take us on the hero's journey of your relationship. And we're going to pull some gold nuggets out in the process.
Okay. Well, I'll try to shorten it a little bit, but it was back in Atlanta, Georgia, and I was leaving a restaurant and I was walking by this bar to go to my car, and this guy was standing in the doorway of this bar and he's like, "Hey, I just opened this place. Can you come in? Come on in and have a drink." And I'm like, "Nah, not tonight." I At that point, I was, like, totally into health, like yoga, meditation, like, I wasn't doing the bar scene anymore. And so we kinda chatted for a minute, and he leaned in, and he was like, "You're the most beautiful woman I've ever seen." And I'm like, "Oh my gosh." And he's a player. He's a player. And then last thing he said was, "Well, will you come back Friday? I'm having a party Friday." And I was like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah." So and I had no intention of going back. So, a couple weeks later, I'm at a fundraiser and I see this guy out of the corner of my eye running towards me. It's John. And he's like, You didn't come on Friday." And I'm like, "No, I didn't." And he goes, "Well, I have to get your phone number. I cannot let you go this time without getting your number." So I gave him my number, seriously, just to get rid of him. Didn't think anything of that, and kept talking to this guy that I was talking to. And that night, the phone rang. And this guy, John, called and he called and he called. And so finally one night I picked up the phone and we actually had like a pretty good conversation. I was like, okay, he's just not some cheesy bar owner. Like he was an Ivy League graduate from Cornell and he was actually getting his master's at Emory. And so the story was that he had gotten his group of friends together to buy this bar. So I was like, okay, he's kind of entrepreneurial. But again, there was no spark. So anyway, I take off. I go to Amelia Island with some girlfriends for a little vacation. And at that point, I was dating like five guys. I had like a list of guys and I was kind of going through them with my girlfriends, like Michael Bolton's manager, Lewis Levin. I was dating a professional wrestler, Barry Windham. You guys may not know any of these people.
Dang, you got quite the list.
Yeah. But, like high profile people where I was like flown all over the country, 100-foot yachts. I mean, it was real glamorous, but it was empty. Like I was really at a point where I was wanting a soul connection, like a heart connection. And so John wasn't even on the list. But for some reason, when I got back from that trip, I picked up the phone and I called John and he came over that night. We ended up staying up on the couch all night long, not doing what you think, but actually talking about God. We talked about God all night long. And so, I mean, I'd love to tell you that we got married and lived happily ever after. But we got married, but the happily ever after, it didn't happen. So, about 12 years later and two kids later, we're living in Florida. And I had not been feeling really connected to John. He was traveling all the time, and I was home trying to deal with the kids. I was part time running. We had a franchise that we just sold. And I went out to lunch with some girlfriends, and one of my friends was getting separated. and another one was in the process of a divorce. And this one couple that were divorcing, I'm telling you, they had the best. I mean, from the outside, I'm like, I was completely shocked. And what it did was just throw me that much more into feeling insecure and disconnected with John. So when John got home that night or that afternoon, I said, let's go take a walk. So we went to take a walk on the beach, and I'm, pouring my heart out, like telling him I'm really distraught about our friends and not really feeling connected. John stops dead in his tracks, turns and looks at me and says, I have something to tell you. And he says, I just need to tell you that when we first got married, I cheated on you. Oh my God, you guys, my heart dropped. So here I was, like, pouring my heart out about, my insecurities, about my friends getting divorced. And now he's telling me the very thing that's going to make me want to divorce him. Right. And his whole premise with that was, by then he had become a Christian. And so he felt like it was something that was between us. Well, let me just tell you, I went from like 0 to 60. I mean, I definitely wanted to divorce him. So the good news is, fast forward, it's now 12 years since that confession, and we're still together. And we have the most amazing relationship ever. And so we distilled it into this 4-part action plan called GRIT, G.R.I.T. And we have a book. We wrote a book. It's called Relationship Grit. But it's the action plan that I like to share with people to help strengthen their relationship and help them build a relationship that they can truly enjoy.
I can't wait, Kathryn. I'm definitely going to ask you in just a minute to explain more about grit, that process for healthy relationships. I love that relationship grit, that amazing book that you wrote. Stephen and I are celebrating 10 years of marriage next month. And it's also like our youngest son's, it'll be his first birthday. So it's a big month for us. And I feel like the longer that we are in business together, we've always been in business together, always done that. The more I realize, and especially when you add team and other people that are helping you run your business, it is so important. We call it like having a healthy foundation to have things built on. And whatever we carry gets reflected in those that we lead. So if there's like something going on between us or whatever, that will like eventually, it just does get dripped down. And so having healthy relationships are so key. So I would love you, Kathryn, to kind of just walk through what is GRIT, what does that acronym stand for, and how can that be applied to relationships?
Yeah. So you nailed it. It is so important to have that strong foundation, right? Because when you nurture the root, you get the fruit, right? I mean, that's what we're taught. But it's so true, especially when things start going wrong. I mean, you need to have that strong foundation. So that's great. And yes, I can share with you the GRIT acronym because it's all about building that foundation. And so the first letter is G, and it stands for God. Bring God into your relationship. And I know that people are all over the place spiritually, and it can be a very loaded subject. I mean, John grew up Jewish. I grew up Catholic, but not going to church except for Mass on Christmas and Easter. I was a New Ager as a young adult and even studied Kabbalah. John was also New Age, but studied more Buddhism. But it was through a series of encounters for us that we became Christians. And of course, that changed everything in our life. But wherever you are, it's bringing in a motto, a mantra, a prayer, something that you all can do together, that you can recite together, that connects you two together. What happened was John was on a plane. So when he had confessed his infidelities to me and I was going to divorce him, he was on a plane and, never normally did this, but he was sitting next to an older man and he was so distraught and he was just bawling his eyes out and telling this man what he had done. And, his wife was going to divorce him. And the man said, I actually had something like this happen early on in my marriage as well. And, so he kind of counseled him and he said, I recommend you come up with a prayer. So John came up with a prayer. Do you want to know what that prayer is? And I share this, so anybody's welcome to have it and use it as their own or use it to build their own. But a lot of people just use it, and we're happy with that. But it's God, we invite you into our marriage and family to love us, to heal us, to protect us, to strengthen us, so we can grow strong together and serve you together. Now, added on a little ending part for our kids and to raise children that glorify and honor you. So there was our first part of our marriage prayer when we first started saying it, but as it became a part of us, we realized that we needed to include our kids into it. So the whole thing is, God, we invite you into our marriage and family to love us, to heal us, to unite us, to strengthen us, so we could grow strong together and serve you together and raise children that glorify and honor you.
Wow. Yes.
Yes. Yes, please.
I'm taking note.
And so that became our prayer. And so I encourage couples to do that. So it is wherever you are in your spiritual life, find something like that has a lot of meaning and that is going to connect you two together.
I just want to edify that for a second because even in Chelsea and I's relationship, we had a moment like that where we started dating really, really young, like in high school. And we had a moment where faith wasn't really our own at that point, and we hadn't really stepped fully into it. We kind of
Mhm.
knew about it, we grew up in it, but it wasn't really ours. And we had a moment of like, I was going to go off to college, as a high schooler, this is game over for us, like he's going 500 miles away. But we had a moment like that where we just knew like there's something about relationships that
Mhm.
it needs a supernatural connection, something that's beyond us, almost a release of control. And I think sometimes supernatural stuff like praying to God for some people might be that scary step. But for us, and even as high schoolers, we just knew, and we had a prayer like this where we just kind of dedicated our relationship. We were just like, God, if this is going to work, it has to be you.
Mhm.
And we just kind of gave it to him, almost released it. And I feel like that really kept us together. And as
Mhm.
we were
Yeah.
about to get married, there was some stuff that came up as well in our relationship that I ended up actually calling off the wedding. Some fear got in the way and I got all
Mhm.
freaked out. And very similarly, we came back to kind of this spiritual side of relationships,
Mhm.
this supernatural connection between two humans that's kind of beyond you. And so, like, if
Mhm.
this is new to you, just like you listen to the show, you're like, I don't know, say a prayer. I just think like the power of words is so powerful.
Yeah.
And so when you dedicate your relationship and kind of release it a little bit, you'd be so surprised the miracles that can happen. So I just want to
Yeah.
just take a second to edify that
Yeah. So good.
because words are so powerful and prayers are so powerful.
Mhm. That's so good. And you're exactly right. I mean, there's a saying, and I'm probably not going to say it right, but like even the atheist, in the moment of crisis is screaming out, "Oh God," right? There's always, I can't remember the saying, but it is true. Like ultimately, that's where we go, right? So, all right, the next letter is R, which stands for resolve. You have to resolve to work on your marriage. So many times it seems so much easier to check out. And especially in today's age, you've got the apps and it's easy to, keep just automatically replace somebody. But, you know, we all know that's not really the way things go. And so you have to resolve to stay in the marriage and work it out. So we'll go back to the prayer. So when John said this prayer and he was saying this prayer, and I did not want to talk to him. I mean, he was relentless though, and I give him a lot of credit for that. And that he just kept saying the prayer and he just kept showing up. So eventually I started to memorize the prayer, but I was not about to say it out loud. I would not give him that satisfaction. And, he would always try to reach for my hand and say the prayer at night. I just wouldn't do it. Well, one night he ended up starting to say the prayer. And for some reason, I reached for his hand and I started to say the prayer with him. And I knew that the night that I resolved to stay in our marriage and work it out. And so, the grass isn't greener on the other side. The grass is greener where you water it. We're all going to go through, there's weeds in the grass, there's going to be things that are there that we, need to deal with. But, you need to resolve to stay together and work it out. And the only thing and the only caveat that I say to this is, of course, if you are in a relationship that is physically or mentally or emotionally abusive, that's a no-go, right? I'm not saying that. I'm not saying to tough it out through something like that. But if you're in a relationship and you're just dealing with like regular relationship issues, and unfortunately, and I don't mean it like this, but infidelity is abusive, but it's something you can get past, it's not something that anybody wants to go through. So I had resolved that, you know what? I love John Gordon and I had these beautiful children and I loved my family. And so I was going to resolve to work it out.
Hmm.
Wow.
Wow.
That's so key. I feel like such a powerful message to share right now. I feel like we're kind of in this cancel culture right now where it's like, let's look for every opportunity to disconnect and be offended, you know? And me and Chelsea have had that mantra as well. Like in that season when we went through almost throwing the wedding down the drain and going, I'm not sure if this is for us. We had a mentor who taught us to protect the connection. He always would
Mhm.
do this, protect the connection, and that's been such a thing for us. 'Cause, like, it's just a visual of,
Mhm.
like, how do we feel today? Do we feel a little disconnected? How do we protect the connection? I think the other thing we've really leaned into is in conflict, always lean into conversation, right?
Mhm.
Because like, in that conversation, you're starting to protect that connection.
Mhm.
Because I think a lot of times, like Chelsea was saying, it's about the foundation, but a lot of times these things don't happen overnight, right? It's like this little thing that's there that kinda
Mhm.
just is there and there and there, and then you add a pressure event.
Mhm.
You add a death in the family, you add a bunch of money, you add success and fame, you add, a bunch of kids to the
Mhm.
pile, right? Like, you add some sort of pressure, and then that crack that was there, it starts to, like, if you don't protect that connection, it can start to break it. And
Mhm.
so I mean, we've had friends and we've had, people we fall in line, like, very similarly where it's like they separate and it's such a shock. It's like, "Oh my gosh." But there has to be that thing that's there, but it has to be, I think, a both side thing of resolve. Like, we're
Mhm.
both in this to win it together, we're both in it to protect the connection. And
Mhm.
so I love this. GR, okay, so we got God, we got resolve.
So the next letter, so we've got G for God, we've got R, resolve, and the next letter is I for invest. You have to invest in your relationship. Don't be a consumer, be an investor. The John Gottman Institute did a study, and couples that invest small amounts of time are 85% more likely to stay together. And the way I like to explain it is this: if you want to be fit and you want to be healthy, do you just say, I want to be fit and healthy? No. You go to the gym, you work out, you plan your healthy meals, whatever goal you want to achieve there, you have to work on it, right? It takes work. It's the same for your bank account. You don't open a bank account, put in a little money, and just sit there and wait for it to grow really big. No, you're also investing. You've got to invest in your bank account to also help it grow. And so it is the same with our relationships. And so many times, our most intimate relationships are the last thing. And I get it. Trust me. I mean, when I was raising our kids, my husband was traveling all the time. And so, I definitely, there was some resentment there. And, it was hard for me to, to take care of myself, hard enough that me thinking about investing in John, but you know what? We realized finally when we had hit this point that it was so important that we needed to do the little things. So I have a little story about that. So, as I said, John travels and traveled all the time. So without fail, I would be on the other side of the house, knee deep in something, whatever I was doing, and I would hear. honey, I knew exactly what he was asking. For the thousandth time, I had to go stop what I was doing, go walk back into the closet as he's holding up a t-shirt and a jacket, and he'll ask me, "Does this match with these shoes?" You guys, they're the same jackets, and I've been telling him the same thing for, I'm not kidding you, years. But I know it's so important for him. And so I just stand there and I look and I'm like, "Yeah, yeah, no, that doesn't go. That matches." I'm telling you. And so, but I know it's that little investment. Another thing that he always does, and I have my own things, right? But he's a writer. So I think, if you know John, he's written 27 books. And so he's always writing. And so again, I'll be busy doing something. I might even be out back pulling weeds and I'll hear him, Can you come in here?" And I know what he's going to ask. He wants me to come in and sit down at his desk and read whatever chapter he's just written. And I mean, it's the last thing I want to do. Like, I can't even get my head around it. But I've finally realized, like, you know what? This is what's important to him. So you have to make that time. You have to invest. And and so sometimes it is a sacrifice, right? And that investing could be a sacrifice on your part, right? But if you're both doing it, right? You're doing it for the good of the team.
That's beautiful. I love Catherine that you pointed out. I thought you, and I'm going to ask you about this in just a minute, like big extravagant trips, or we do this date night. And I'd love to hear about some of those too. But I love how you talked about like stopping what you were doing to go invest in your husband for something that was important to him that might have taken, 5-10 minutes to help him choose an outfit. I think that is really beautiful that it's the small moments that are of an inconvenience for you, that you are shifting your attention to their attention and therefore you're investing. So I just think that was a really beautiful example and kind of caught me off guard, like, oh, I wasn't expecting an investment in that way.
Yeah.
But I would love to hear like what you and John have done like since that moment. Or I know you have older kids that are out of the house, so it's probably different versus when you were raising them at home. But what are some of the things that you guys have put into practice where it's like every couple of weeks we do this? Or are there things like that to invest back into your marriage?
Okay. So two things there. First, I got to share this story because this is huge. So, my kids must have been, I want to say, 13 and 15. That's about right. My daughter was in high school and they were into sports. The age that you guys are in right now, I just want to tell you, hold on, baby. If get through this stage. These are the hardest times. And so, I love that you guys are doing all this together. And I know you work together too. And that, believe me, John and I worked together. I got stories about that. So, there's a lot there. So for you guys to be focused on, building that foundation and putting practices into place. So it's hard. So anyway, my kids, fast forward, now they're bigger. They say, okay, little kids, little problems, big kids, big problems. That is true, but it's all relative. But anyway, so my kids are a little older and they're both now playing sports. They're both like in these elite sports. My son's a tennis player, my daughter's a lacrosse player. So I was going to practices and games all the time. If I wasn't doing that, I was carpooling. And so I was running around all the time. And so with tennis, with my son, all these tournaments, they're not local. Like I was driving 3 to 5 hours to stay in these, crappy hotels with no food, right? Just, so my son could compete in these tournaments. And if he won, which of course you wanted him to win, then you'd stay through Monday. So they'd play on Monday. So it was a huge commitment. Okay. And to top it off, by the way, both of my kids had gluten allergies. So I couldn't just stop at Chick-fil-A and get a chicken sandwich, it took a lot of effort. Okay. I really reached a point of like ultimate stress. Because every weekend after I was gone, I was trying to come home and I was trying to play catch up, but I could never get caught up. By the time, it was time for me to finally maybe meal prep, I was really, really stressed out. And finally, I realized I need help. I picked up the phone and I called John and I said, I need you to come home. Like, I need you to come home. And he said to me, oh, okay. You mean you need me to come home and do your job?
Mm.
Ouch.
Yep, he did. He said it. But you know what? I was so defeated at that point. All I could say was, yeah. And so he did. And actually, that year, his word was serve. So every year we pick a word. That's a whole other thing. He wrote a book called One Word. So every year as a family, we each pick a word. His word that year was serve. And so he did. He came home. And, in the beginning, like the first week or two, I could see, he probably thought like, this is so, he was having fun. He was connecting with the kids. He was, it was all fun and games. Well, let me tell you, after 3 months of that, it started to wear on him. Right. And he got to the point where he's like, man, I really, really admire and appreciate what you do for our family. And so that was, a huge sacrifice and commitment for him to do for me. But it was something that I needed at that time. And in the interim, it did so many things. It actually brought us all together as a family. John actually, he has a running joke. He says, yeah, when I got home that year, you know, man, they were all messed up. I'm thinking, man, I needed a new team. And then he said, but what I realized is I needed to be a better leader. But really, it just helped him connect with his kids. So, um, you know, those kind of commitments are huge, and hopefully, people don't have to get to that point, but sometimes it's inevitable. So, yeah, that was a huge resolve. And Chelsea, you asked something else. What was it?
Oh, I wanted to hear if you and John
Oh,
have
yeah.
certain like practices that you put into place, whether it's like, marriage counseling every week or what are those things that you guys do?
So, I'm super, super inconsistent, and John Gordon is the most consistent human I've ever met in my life. So, I'm kind of all over the place, but John's a walker. So, one of the things that we do is we take walks together. And I'm telling you, sometimes on these walks, I'm fighting, we're fighting, but by the time we're done, we've worked it out. Now, and I always say this, when you have young kids like you guys do, you can't just like go, "Hey honey, let's, go for a 30-minute walk and leave the 1 and 3-year-old at home." So I get it. And so in that way, it could be something as simple as, hey, after we put the kids to bed, let's go sit out on the patio. And, you know, here's the other great thing. I have an action plan. But I'm saying you can take it from anything, any kind of book that might have something on relationships, and, just go through and say, okay, Tuesday nights we're gonna sit down and, you know, we're going to ask each other questions about communication or, whatever it is. So it doesn't have to be like a big event. We never plan like, okay, every April we're going to the Bahamas. It wasn't like that. Our life didn't allow for that. We did not have family close by that could watch our children, but it can be something. And so for us, there was, to answer your question, there's not anything I can think of that was like an absolute. Now, we did do something, but it was with our whole family. It wasn't just us as a couple, and your kids are really too young to do this right now anyway, but it was a family meeting, and it's something I recommend every family do, especially when your kids get to the age where they can actually sit at the table and have a conversation. Yeah. But in terms of John and I connecting, I can't really tell you, um, like a set thing. Now, we would plan things and say, "Okay, we're gonna go to Chicago," but it was never anything set, but the intention was always there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's more of It sounds like, obviously, I know you guys do things like do a getaway or whatever, but you're right. It's more about the intention of a mindset around
Yeah.
I'm willing to invest in our relationship. And that looks like it could look like a day to day thing of turning my attention towards my spouse or my partner when they're asking me
Yeah.
for this help because I know it'll mean well. So I love that.
Yeah.
It's just a practice. Yeah.
Yeah, and another thing that you can do that, I've talked to couples about, because again, depending on where you are, I mean, some couples they might be starting a business, they might financially not be in a, everybody has their situations. So pick a book to read together. And a lot of couples read my book, and I'm not saying just my book. There's a lot of books out there that, couples can read together. Like in our book, we kind of go back and forth. And then we even have like each of us have 11 tips at the end. There's questions. Like one of the things in the book is because we go through the 4 C's as well, which is communicate, connect, commit, and care. And so on the communicate part, it could be, you guys asking each other, like Stephen asked Chelsea on a scale of 1 to 10, how well do I communicate? And what would make it a 10? And then vice versa. And so it could be something as simple as that. So there's a lot of great books out there. Of course, my book is a great book to start.
Yeah. We will link to it in the comments for
Yes, I'm gonna
everybody.
go get
Make
that
sure you get
book.
this book. I mean, I think a lot of times we're like, "Hey, you want to talk?" And then like we're like, "What do we talk about?" Right? Sometimes like you just like you're kind of fried at the end of the day. So I think it's so helpful to have something like this, like a guide, something that you know, if you guys are committed to reading the book together, like it's going to go deep. Like
Yeah.
because the questions are going to prompt it and it take you guys to where maybe you haven't gone in conversation
Mhm.
before or talking about things you haven't talked about before. So we've
Mhm.
seen so much of like the power of going through books together in
Mm.
our relationship and then just having time to talk about them. So yeah, we'll definitely link that in the comments or in the chat below. Yeah. Awesome.
Funny because early on, John and I, like I said, we started a franchise called Mo. We didn't start the franchise. We brought the franchise to Florida. It's called Mo's Southwest Grill. It's mainly on the East Coast. That was so hard because he was gone all day at the restaurants. I was still trying to do the back end part at home, and John was starting his speaking business. So I'd be calling people to get, stir up a little hype to have him come speak. And I'm not kidding you. There are times he would walk in the door because I had to hurry up and get everything done before my kids got off the bus at 2. And he would walk in, I would do like 50 things, and he would walk in and ask me about the 51st thing, like the one thing I didn't do. So so I always say to couples, like, especially if you work together, don't talk about work after hour, like, just don't.
Yeah.
Mm.
Running a business together, we are like, is like the best marriage counseling because it
Yeah.
really forces you into communication, forces you into, roles, responsibilities, boundaries, vulnerability. Like, oh my gosh.
Mhm.
So, okay, I want to hear about the T. We can't cliffhanger. So we got God, we got resolve, we got invest.
And the last letter is T, which is together. You have to do it together. Now, when I say that, I'm not saying you're both always giving 100%, right? Because sometimes there's an ebb and flow. Like one of you might be, in a phase or of busy doing something, but you both want it and you want to work on it together. You have to be on the same team. You can't be on separate teams. So when John was traveling, there was one time I told you my kids, play sports, and he called. It was about 9:30. He was at some swanky hotel in Laguna Beach. I was exhausted, and he starts talking to me, and he hears the kids in the background. He goes, "Are the kids still up? What are the kids doing up?" Oh my gosh, you guys, I completely flipped out. Like we were on separate teams. He was my opponent, and all I wanted to do was take him down. And that's where we realized, oh my goodness, we need to figure out how to tackle this together. Like we have to be on the same team. You know, think about it like this. It's like tug of war. If you're on one side of the rope, your partner's on the other side of the rope, and you're both pulling, your strength is cut in half. But if you're both on the same side of the rope, pulling against your opponent, your strength is doubled. So make sure you're on the same team, because you know what? If you're keeping score, you're both going to lose, right? So make sure you want it together, you're doing it together, and remember that you're on the same team and you're rooting for each other.
That's something Chelsea and I have been growing in,
Mhm.
of course. And especially with kids, because I feel like kids, it can be very team, where it's like team dad, team mom. And sometimes if we're having a little bit of a, hey, we're working through something in front of the boys, I think that can be one of the most hurtful things is when I make mom look like a bad guy, in front of the kids. And so we've had to really go to our kids in moments like that and bring them into it and be like, hey, I know that this happened and that, like, I want you to know, like, I'm on mama's team. Like, I'm on
Mhm.
her side. And if I made her look like, she was angry or something like that is my bad,
Mhm.
And we've had to really work through that because
Mhm.
I think we have to constantly just business and marriage in raising kids, we got to go, I'm on your side. I'm on your
Mhm.
side. Cause it's so easy to just go, are you for me or against me?
Mhm. Yeah. I mean, it is an easy thing to fall into, rightly so. Some of it's self-preservation, right? I mean, if you guys are both super stressed and you're both working really hard, and it is easy. So it takes a level of emotional maturity for you to step back and go, "Wait a minute. We're in this together." Yeah. I want to address the other thing you said early on. That is something that would happen with us if we were dealing with the kids and somehow we disagreed on something. One of us might call the other one out in front of our kids, which just, really wrecks them, right? Because then they're like, wait a minute. And so I was like, listen, we have got to make sure, even if you disagree with what I'm saying, or even if I disagree with what you're saying, let's talk about it after we talk to the kids, right? We can always, don't try to, go against me when we're in front of them, because it does do something, right? It kind of, you know, it kind of cracks something. So yeah, you have to, again, even with your kids, make sure you look like a united front, and that makes them feel more secure.
Yeah, absolutely. Catherine, with this togetherness, like we are together, we are on the same team. What is your thought process when there is an area of conflict or disagreement between you and John? If you're both fighting for togetherness, but there's clearly something you're at odds, like what is your thought process to try and come to that resolve, whether you are totally on the same page or you're like, we're going to just see things differently? What is your process for that?
We really talk it out for sure. I mean, there's a lot of talking it out. And sometimes, like, even especially if it came to the kids, even if there were things we did disagree on, we kind of had to come in the middle, come in the middle and just decide, okay, how are we going to handle this together with our kids? And I have a story about that. I don't know how much time we have. How we doing?
We can squeeze it in. I
Yeah.
love it. I love the stories.
I'm going to share this story. And when I do, like, I'm not recommending other parents do this, but so my daughter was getting very badly bullied. And it was at a church after school program that these girls would come after her and take her shoes and throw them in the lake. And this kept happening, and it was really, really hard for me. I grew up a Navy brat, so I would move to other states and go into school in the middle of the school year. Like, for me, it was like sink or swim. And so I kinda learned early on how to navigate that, and unfortunately, there was a lot of fighting that kinda went along with that, but I learned how to be tough. And so, this started happening to my daughter, and, John was coaching her, and, remember, he's all about positivity and leadership. He's like, "Jane, you just gotta say this, you gotta say this." Well, guess what? Nothing was working. Christmas time, they went on a little trip. They went ice skating. And all of a sudden, I get a phone call. Jade's at the hospital. She has broke her arm. They had pushed her down. She had this big old cast on her arm. So fast forward, they're back in school. It's around January, and the bullying's still happening. So finally, I pulled my daughter aside and I looked at her and I go, let me just tell you something right now. If that girl comes up to you today, you're going to take that cast and you are going to hit her as hard as you can in her stomach. Do you understand me? And John was behind me like, oh my gosh. But I'm like, I'm done with this. Like, no. And I'm like, do you understand? And she's like, yes, ma'am. But you know what? She came home from school that day, and that girl did come up to her, and she hit her. She goes, Mom, I hit her so hard it knocked the breath out of her. I go, good. And you know what? She never bothered her again. So I'm telling you that, and I don't know if that's what I would recommend, but like sometimes you're not going to agree on the way to handle things. So, then you just have to have grace with each other, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure. That's a funny
I could
real
just see
life
John's face.
moment.
Oh
I
my
could
God.
see myself doing that. Like
That's very much Chelsea.
Yeah,
Yes.
like Steven is very calm and collective and like looks for the positive in everyone for everyone, which I love. But I will get like
Sometimes you
mom
need
over here.
justice. You need
You
justice,
need the
mama.
justice. Justice is served.
I'm telling you, I had just had it, and it was really hard for me to watch that. She would come home she was just distraught. So yeah, she took care of that one. John still, I'm not kidding you. He still shakes his head when I tell the story. So, you are going to have times that you don't agree. But you know what it's about? Like I said, having that emotional maturity to say, okay, how can we come to an agreement that works for both of us?
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. I've loved this episode, Kathryn, and I meant to tell you this earlier on when you were sharing early in your relationship where John came to you and he shared that um there had been infidelity in your relationship. And I think for you to stick it out and to, grab his hand and to say that prayer and commit to being with him, I'm sure you had lots of people just saying like, run, Kathryn, like he doesn't deserve you, all of those things. And you choosing to like enter in, I can already imagine like the vulnerability to like choose again into that
Mm.
yes for your family and for him. And so I just think that that speaks to like your leadership and your values and just like your strength, like that inner strength. And I love all these fun stories that you shared. And I so appreciate your vulnerability and your honesty, but there is like a really deep inward like strength that you have. And like it probably started way back before you had to make that really hard decision. And I know like God's totally honored you in your yes to that and done so many things through you guys. So that's just really amazing. I want to
Yeah.
make sure I didn't end this podcast without telling you that, like that inner strength that like, you know, not everyone might see or be recognized for, but you choosing to say yes. So that's really
Powerful.
powerful.
Thank you for saying that, Chelsea. It's never a good thing when that happens in a relationship, but we are all human. And, we come into the relationship with our baggage before we ever get there. And so, it can be as simple as I'm getting my needs met. And, if you can't think beyond that. And so these kind of things can happen in relationships, but ultimately I realized with John is that I did love him and that I did want to work it out. And so there's a reward in that. There really is. And I don't normally share this. I'm going to share this and I hope I share it the way I want it to come across. I wish it didn't happen, but I also see how that happening then prepared us for what our life was going to be like when John became super, super busy And, super famous, he would not say it that way. But I mean, in the speaking world, he did 90 talks last year. So you have to understand he's traveling on the road all the time. He's in hotels all the time. There are women that read his books that want to meet with him all the time to have coffee and talk about how his book, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not kidding you. I actually interviewed this woman to come work for our company. And she goes, I listen to John's voice every night on audiobook. It's like, oh, that's great. But what I'm saying is, and I got to be careful the way I'm saying this. I'm not happy it happened, but I see how God used it. There you go. How God used that in our marriage to help John on his, because he, it was very hard and fast. Like when he's traveling, he doesn't go to bars. When he's traveling, he doesn't sit at the bar at the hotels. Like there are things he just doesn't do. And, because he's been there and he said, when that happened, I'm really telling you guys a lot of stuff. I normally don't share, but when that happened, he said all of a sudden he looked at this woman and he was like, "You're not my wife." And he said it was like this thing came over him. And we know that's God. And he said, "I will never, ever do anything like," and that was like, it was like he knew that that was, yeah. And so again, we've used it. He's used it to actually help us now. So it's, it's hard to kind of say that. Like, I don't ever want to say, because I'd hate for one of, whoever in the relationship to say, see, it's going to help. Like, no, that's not what I mean.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and I think it comes back to that authority conversation, one of our mentors says, "Shame will steal your authority," So that thing coming home to him too is like, there's a shame, and it was years later that he told you, right? It was he probably carried that shame, and that
Mm,
shame would have led to more, like, the things in the little get multiplied in the lot, so if it wasn't dealt for then, it'd be all over the place now, you know? But you guys actually open up the vulnerability, right,
mm,
to build the authority so you guys could walk in the influence and the power
yeah.
and the rooms you're walking into now without the fear of the shame coming back up in this darkness, being a part of the relationship. That authority you guys have built is so powerful.
Mhm.
That's exactly right. Yeah. Well, and that's actually why he shared it. And I didn't share that part of the story. He had become a Christian and his thought process. So he actually thought it was going to be okay to share with me. This is how naive he is. He just said, like, I just always felt like it was something between us. And now that I, was a Christian and following Christ, I just feel like that was something that we needed to give up together. And so, obviously it caused a lot of ruckus, but for good. So, there's that saying, what you cover, God will uncover, and what you uncover, God will cover. Right? And so I think God covered us in that when he uncovered it, as hard as it was for me to say that now, right? At the time, it wasn't. But yeah.
Yes. So cool. Thank
Catherine, thank you so
Yeah,
much. This
thank
has
you.
been a power hour.
Yes.
Lots of wisdom. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Share this episode with someone who needs to hear it. Thanks, Catherine, for being on the Rainmaker Family Show. We'll put all the links in the show notes with the book and everything. For people who want to find you online, hear more about you, listen to your podcast, like where can they go to find more of Catherine online?
Yeah. So my podcast is called Kathryn for Real. And as you can tell by talking to me, I pretty much keep it real and I say things that other people may not say. And I try to bring on guests and ask questions, not in a, exploitive way, but ask questions that I think people really want to know. And so my website is kathrynforreal.com, podcast Kathryn for Real. And my Instagram is at Kathryn Gordon. And you can get my book, Relationship Grit, on any platform, Amazon, Barnes and Noble.
We will definitely put all the info in the show notes. Thank you so much, Catherine. Until next time, this is the Rainmaker Family Show. We'll see you guys in the next episode.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Rainmaker Family Show. Hey, if you are not a part of our Rainmaker Mastermind, we have a new opportunity for you to book a one-on-one strategy call with one of our Rainmaker coaches.
If you want to get a call with them, see if it's a good fit for you to work with us to build a business that allows you to have time freedom and financial freedom, you can get that call at makeitrainmama.com/podcast. That's makeitrainmama, MOMMA.com/podcast.